It's Rachel. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the First Peoples Cultural Council's online learning series. My name is Aliana Parker, and I'm the Language Program Director at First Peoples Cultural Council, and I'll be your host today. Today's webinar is titled From Language Planning to Implementation, an Nsyilxcen Story, and it's presented by Danielle Saddleman and Sarah Alexis from the Okanagan Indian Band. Before we get going, I'd just like to introduce the First Peoples Cultural Council, as I know that some of you may not be familiar with us. FPCC, as we call it, is a BC provincial organization with the mandate to support the revitalization of First Nations languages, arts, and cultural heritage throughout the province. We are very grateful to have our office in the beautiful, traditional, and unceded territory of the syilx Nation in the village of Wechosip. And today I am also calling in from the territory of the syilx Nation. We also have an additional satellite office in nkmaplqs within the traditional unceded territory of the Secwepemc people. Today, I'd like to take a moment to thank Amber Blankiron, who has coordinated this event and is on call today as our moderator. And now I am very honored to introduce our presenters today, Danielle Saddleman and syilx Sarah Alexis, who are joining us from the Okanagan Indian Band. So the First Peoples Cultural Council has been very happy to support this amazing team and the Okanagan Indian Band team for many years with their language arts and heritage work. We've supported their Language Nest program for a number of years from the beginning, really. We've also supported their First Voices work, many of their other initiatives in both arts and heritage. And we've also been really happy to support their language planning work, which is what Danielle and Sarah are here to share about today. So Danielle Saddleman comes from nkmaplqs, the Okanagan Indian Band in Vernon, BC. She's a champion, advocate, and leader for language and cultural renewal in her home community. She is also the language and culture lead for her community. And syilx Sarah Alexis is also a member of the Okanagan Indian Band. Her heritage roots are Daketh and syilx. She's in the final stages of her Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan. She is passionate about Nsyilxcen revitalization and teaching. And so without further ado, I will pass it over to syilx and Danielle.
Why Haskell and Giant Squeeze High Afternoon at Kikin in nkmaplqs. In Tui Il Michum Mistum Albert Saddleman Nash into Mabel Saddleman. My partner is Shane Miller, and we have 3 beautiful children, and we have 2 grandchildren. So thanks for joining us here and inviting all of you and the ancestors of our families and ancestors of all of your families. So we're calling in from Nsyilxcen, where both Sarah and I reside in the Okanagan, the north end of Okanagan Lake, also known as nkmaplqs.
Waipis naxilch isquist skawil kuntil and nation quid in ahab talbi nas chekwal isquisquistel kin suchmat mayam ul kinachtilin de suchmat mayam ul sitmat maya kink tkasa seal is stimtim geeld nalis khaliwi ul ku kuliud ul sin klochtan. So hello everyone, my name is Sarah Alexis or syilx. My parents are Paul Alexis and Gloria Kwa. I am a teacher, an instructor, a student, and any kind of roles that fill in between those two. I have a beautiful husband and we have 2 children together here, 2 daughters here. It's funny, Danielle and I are like neighbors, so when we do language work, we're really doing language work in our neighborhood. And we're really excited to actually share our story of how we have actively engaged the Okanagan Indian Band or OKIB community for our language strategy planning project. And we are so excited to delve into what we've done.
Awesome. So our language strategy work and our guiding practices, in 2020, 2021, 22, 23 is when we started. There was an opportunity with First Peoples Cultural Council to do some language planning, which is so important because I think all the time before that, we kind of just, you write your grants and say what you're going to do and accomplish, and you kind of learn from the work that you're going to do or think you're going to do, and how much work it actually is to do language work. So I think OKIB has done a really remarkable job of the work that they've done up to now, or even before this strategy is like, okay, this is the work that we're going to do and needs to be done. But also we've also done a lot of learning along the way of like what's actually what can we actually accomplish. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned is like we can't rely on 1 or 2 people to do this work. We have to have a team of people in the organization, people in the community, even at the higher level of doing this work. And we all have a role and responsibility to revitalize our language. I think that's the biggest thing. We've come from the strategy and even before this strategy. So now that we have a strategy, so we're going to share today with you about that. So, some of the things that the first thing, establishing a working committee, having shared notes and insights taking, including as many OKIB community in our project, right from leadership, the organization, OKIB community, the grassroots in community. Having a clear communication, also the strategy informs the need for more communication. So a lot of things that came out of our strategy plan is that we need to communicate more with community. The importance of our chaptik, our oral stories, leading the process through our nsyilxcen consensus making project, inclusion of spiritual practice and values. It was important to include those while we were in the process of creating this language strategy plan. Also the importance of recording and documenting engagement sessions and planning the meetings.
To follow through with that, there has been a lot of data and information and knowledge we've collected over the past couple of years. In our strategy plan, the images here are just examples of how we're collecting language data to help inform the work that we're doing in our OKIB community, in the organization, and then in the community itself. Just so as planners, Danielle and I are able to go in and see, what are the shifts that are happening? Are there increases? Are there decreases? Are we collecting the same number of data every year? Are we looking at Nsyilxcen as comprehensively as we can? So this is just an example of some of the content highlighted in the actual strategy plan itself. We love looking at kind of the numbers and looking at the projection of how language nkmaplqs or Nsyilxcen in our community is either growing or shifting. So there's a lot of in our strategy, we've really wanted to create these areas in our document that people can go into, planners can go into and look at some kind of the real life data that's happening in community. In terms of the actual strategy planning process itself, it has been really shifted and upholded by our oral methodologies, our chaptik, our oral stories. As Danielle mentioned in the beginning, this has been like a very pivotal point for us in terms of our planning process as a team. In the context of how our first story, how food was given, literally gave us a guiding process on how to plan things. In that chaptik of how food was given, we have our 4 chiefs, Spring Salmon, who represents action and implementation, Black Bear, who represents tradition and knowledge, Bitterroot, who represents community and kinship, and Sia, who represents innovation, creativity, and growth. Each of these components actually really help uphold the work that we can do as in our planning committee on how we were able to establish a process for actively engaging community and actively gathering that insight, gathering that important input. This particular chaptik that we had followed is a well-known chaptik in our nation and within all syilx communities here in the Okanagan. And it really describes this specific process and how, you know, there's a problem or an issue or a challenge that exists. And it shows us how we can approach that problem, that challenge or that issue. It shows us how we can analyze it, how we can address it. And then, of course, how we can come to some sort of decision or consensus agreed upon how we can, you know, approach that issue or that challenge. In the context of this story and in this project, we really put language and culture revitalization in the center. So when we had been planning from the very beginning in our core team, Danielle and I would sit and we would constantly think about, okay, this is like the overall projection of where we're going. This is what we're looking at. And so this particular chaptik, this oral story of how food was given, highlights a very like well-known process here in Okanagan land, the Inaukenwuch. The Inaukenwuch is really like a key decision-making process where the collective comes together and shares and pools insight and knowledge together. And that insight and knowledge comes from every single individual that has participated in this project. And so as people are coming in and out of this project, we're constantly like focusing on language and culture revitalization.
So this is just one section of our strategy plan and one of our four food chiefs. So this one comes from Skim Case. So you see it has some guiding principles there. High level principles on how to support language and cultural revitalization. Then it also has some priority areas, you know, identified areas from the community's insights and priority actions. Key major actions to undertake immediately within the next 2 years. And then secondary actions to undertake within the next 5+ years. And also actions to undertake within the next 10 years. And also indicators determine the alignment and successful implementation. So, yeah, I'm just like, every time I look at this document, I'm always like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. It's like, so, you know, Scott Wheel did a really good job of laying this out, and the community really put some amazing like perspectives out there, what they want, or how do they want this team or language and culture to be enhanced within the organization, or, you know, like other things, which is so good because, you know, language work is so much, there's only so much we can do as a team. So it was important that, you know, the community is participating and informing like what direction they want our team to bring or what they want in this organization for language and culture. I'm not sure, Scott Will, if you had anything else to add on to this one.
I do. There, when you're talking about like visioning, a lot of this, and it ties back to our story about like visioning what we want for language and culture revitalization. And so the intent of like the strategy is to think long term. You know, in that story, the chiefs gathered and said, what will we do for the future people to be? And so when Danielle and I would meet together and plan, and then when we would meet later on with our core planning team, we would kind of have that same concept in mind. What are we going to do for the future people to be? What are we going to do for future OKIB community? How can we support that? And so thinking about like that long-term vision, not necessarily just, you know, next year and the next couple of years. We want to think big picture. We want to be able to support the work that will eventually, you know, our children and grandchildren might take on.
Yes, the next generations. So planning resources, you know, core planning team is so important to the work of having language planning, revitalization, and for creating a committee. You know, you want the buy-in from people in the organization or who are already doing the work and who will support the work. You know, creating project charters, a high-level document outlining the overall direction of the project. I think that's been so important to the work, and make sure that we're not missing any steps along the way. And because, you know, I think it can be hard work, and just, the importance of planning. And I always think of our own people, our own scale of people across Canada or in BC, is like, you look back at our ancestors and they were really good planners. We're born to be planners, so it's important that we have, these documents in place to keep us in line and keep us so that, we're hitting our milestones and goals throughout the process. Space, dedicated daily and weekly and bi-weekly meetings with the Language Nest. We had both in person, online, and I think with our committee it ended up being more online because, we have the people we have in this work are really are important within their own work, within their own programs or their departments as well. Dedicated online space to see project updates, make sure everyone is being updated, and also those conversations were also recorded. Utilization of organization and community for project engagement. So our team, our committee was of our education director of language and culture, the language and cultural agents with myself, our SYLX consultant, which was Skawil, and also SYLX language culture educators from the cultural immersion school and then the daycare. And then also, founders of our immersion school and our nest, because they're the reasons why we have a language and a cultural immersion school in our community, but also why we have a nest. So both of those founders have written their PhDs for the Language Nest and for our school. So I always think, it's always important, that they're included in these discussions, and, they're right there from the beginning and also be a part of the work moving forward. Yeah. Also, making sure, we're always getting things out, like the same clip and social media for our different, for our surveys, anything, of our events. And I think Scott Will's going to touch on those in a little bit further here, some examples.
Mm-hmm. In terms of additional planning resources we used as our core committee and for the project, a big part was our literature. We created a literature review. These two images are really just examples of how we were looking at literature that already exists. We're very fortunate here in the Okanagan that we have a lot of actual resources on syilx methodology, syilx work, syilx planning, research, analysis. A lot of the literature that we did go over included things like our language and cultural declarations, really high key pieces in our Syilx Nation, Syilx oral narrative, so looking at other chaptik, other Smeatmai, or anecdotal stories that might play into this. And then, of course, as a traditional literature review, there's a lot of different case studies of languages we're also looking at, different types of language planning that exist around the province and around Canada and even internationally. And then, of course, the focus on Nsyilxcän. How many people are writing about Nsyilxcän? How can we use that information to help support the work that we want to do for the strategy? That second image on the bottom there is just an example of how we were looking at some of that data. So example, we would find a resource, we would kind of pull out any kind of key findings. If that resource did talk about, strategic planning or strategic priorities, we would pull out those priorities and actions, however they're approaching their strategy work. And then, of course, a little column there about, how can we directly tie this to our language revitalization strategy planning project? And then the second key planning resource that we have at our core planning team includes this idea about engagement. So learning how to plan how we're going to actively engage our community. So we did work from an overall big project event charter. That event charter outlines any kind of the targeted participation that we were wanting to look at and include. It also included event logistics, so thinking about who, where, when, how, some small budgetary breakdown, and then of course, figuring out what are the engagement questions, how are we going to take notes, how are we going to actively capture everything that we're talking about. So this is just an example of our project charter. It was really just an overarching document that we as the core planning team can continuously look at in terms of strategy planning. Includes our project name, the host department in terms of like the Okanagan Indian Band organization, the organization itself, start and completion date, total overall budget, authorization, so who is authorized to do what task, for example, event and project descriptions, so very succinct, very straight to the point, project objectives, so thinking about what are those objectives for the organization, what are those objectives for the department, and what are they for the project? How can we weave all of those into our entire engagement series? The charter also included success criteria of the event and the project. So, thinking about what are some indicators that we know as a core planning team that we're, hitting the mark on these things. It also included other major milestones, major tasks that might come up, and the need to create a communication plan. So how are we going to communicate, our engagement series to community? How are we going to communicate back the content that we're hearing and making sure that we have that feedback loop? So in terms of planning our engagement series, there was a lot of super fine detail work. We're looking at community events throughout the year or throughout the project timeline, and trying to do like paper surveys where we can. So for an example, like the organization held a community event, and we were the language and culture team and I were able to kind of piggyback off of it and bring our paper surveys and get people to kind of fill it out that way. So we're really looking at like, where are the areas of alignment in terms of how we can engage people? We really wanted to make sure that we're piggybacking off of other community events that might be happening, other larger events, such as any of the powwows that we might hold, our cultural camps, our Nsyilxcen Day, and then even some of like the events that happen around in the winter. There was a lot of areas of overlap that we were able to kind of like happily fit in, which was really fortunate for us. And then the image on the side is just an example of how we're planning, those engagement series. So this document, this image is just really an example of an internal document for the core planning team. It includes things like the time and date, the location, so any kind of the buildings or the reserves that we might be targeting, our stakeholder targets, who we want to include or who we're trying to like ensure that we have at that specific session, and then any kind of like personal tasks that might come up. So for example, if we want to include content to or personnel from or students, for example, who are doing language work. So there's some notes there about us like having to create these connections and make sure that as a planning team that we're following through with that. So in terms of our engagement series, in the first year, we were really following the Chaptik story, how food was given. Each chief represents a different specific portion of our society. So for example, spring salmon represents men, black bear represents elders, bitterroot represents women, Saskatoon berry represents youth. And we had actually, I think we were very successful in terms of looking at those different categories in the first year of the project. And we were incredibly fortunate to have a second year of the project to fully delve further into, our community. So the image that you kind of see are the people that we're looking beyond, our 4 food chiefs here. We're also looking at all of the communities and our members who are, doing language and cultural revitalization work that we might not have included or who might not have had the chance to participate in any of these in the first year. So our second year was really just delving deeper into, the different communities in our Okanagan Indian Band community. In terms of our engagement series itself, we had created a lot of communication items. So we were constantly like sharing and setting event dates, times, and locations. We would have designated sign-up forms. So for example, we used Google, Google Forms, so people can sign up and we can kind of gauge, the amount of numbers we might need for, meals, for example. And then of course, this follow through of continuously like making sure that there's reminders and post follow up on our social media and our local newsletters. We wanted to make sure that we were as visible and transparent as possible. And this is just an example of in a second year when we were trying to create our second set of engagement series, making sure that, people can see it. It's all on one kind of information sheet. And then as the event got closer, we would kind of share little snippets of each individual event just as reminders. And so again, creating this idea about transparency and visibility for this project that we're doing.
So these are some examples of our engagement series, the types of engagements utilized. So, community surveys, online and paper, so when say if you're doing it at the cultural camp or community powwow or Kinskillik days, that you would definitely have the paper copy. And then also, have the link online if people wanted to, we could send them or let them know where it was online. Our Elkin Week sessions, community dinner and luncheons, focus groups, that was more apparent in the second year. It's like, oh, I think we need to like include these people in the strategy. We had elders luncheons. We even got more specific of having male and female because there's just the different perspectives, how they see things. And sometimes, some things are only meant for males, some things are meant for females or in those discussions. Language and cultural team planning discussions, we'd have those. We also included our leadership. We had a leadership sessions and, we ensured that we engaged them. And then even departmental director sessions. And then, we had social media campaigns. I think, making it fun of like, what is language and what do you want it to be? And like, what does it mean? Like when you speak your language or, so these are things that were pulled from our planning engagements as well, which was fun. I think the community liked to be engaged. So this is what our engagement series looked over from 220, 221, 222, 23. As you see in our first year, we had 14 engagement sessions or how we engage with community staff, etc. Second year, we're like, okay, we need to engage with these people. So, we had our youth sessions, male, elder, luncheon, community dinners, and Elkin Week sessions, the chief and council, the directors, a lot of things I already just mentioned. It was at the first year, but in the second year, it's like, we wanted to mention our engage with the cultural immersion alumni. So you see the balance is like OKIB has really strong like a language nest and then a school, and then there's really nothing for those students who complete grade 7 with the school on reserve. So it's kind of like, well, we need to hear from their perspective of what they want. And it was a good session with those alumni students. They see the gap themselves and they miss, I think a lot of times is students will go through the immersion school and then they get to grade 8 and then there's language, there's opportunity for them, but it's like them going back to preschool. So they're not even being challenged. So how can we support that? That's why we wanted to ensure that we wanted to have them involved in this engagement. Language and cultural knowledge holders, syilx artists, those innovators, the creativity, we want to ensure, they can capture like our language and culture and like, it's important to involve them. Youth adults, we had a really strong youth participating. I think it was 13 to 18, but it's like, okay, that's a space for them. But what about, young adults who are from like 19 to 29 is a space for them, which is so important. You know, I think, you know, we go through these different stages in life and where do you fit in? And then also our indigiqueer, STAMIA people, you know, we want to make sure that they were involved in this work, you know, and more OKIB community, our Nsyilxcen learners and then instructors. You know, we have a bachelor language of a fluency degree program now. You know, we wanted to ensure that if they weren't attended into the last year session, that we wanted to make sure that, you know, we created this space to engage them. Fluent speakers, we engaged them. Then also we were like, oh yeah, school district 22 teachers and staff, like who work in the Indigenous department at the school district, and we wanted to engage them. And some of them are our members who work in that department. So, you know, wanted to make sure they're being heard and what they see where students are at, what they would like to see within the school district. Also more language and cultural team planning sessions, which is really good because language and culture is hard work. And it's nice to have this space where our team can participate. And then language and team chat teach analysts, which I think was so amazing to do with the team, all of the work, you know, and they're very passionate about the work that they do. You go to the next slide. So engagement, queer, and data collection, you know, types of questions asked, you know, what would support your participation in cultural activities? What needs to be done as scale people in language and culture? And where can OKIB language and culture programs can improve or enhance? You know, I think when we were doing up these questions, it's like, well, it's you really have to think of like, you know, where we are now in language and where we want to be, and, you know, how can we improve? These are so important questions to ask the community. You know, like, why aren't some people coming out to learn language? Why aren't people practicing, you know, wanting to learn cultural activities? What needs to be done? And I think the strategy really informed us of, you know, I think one of the big themes in our strategy was safe places, you know, creating safe places for community to practice and learn language and culture. But, you know, I think when you're thinking about questions, like really think and write them down. I feel, because sometimes, you know, you get through and you're like, oh, we should have asked this. Like, take some good time amount and engage other people of questions. Because I think, you know, like maybe we should have asked this question in our thing, or maybe we shouldn't ask that one. We should have asked this one. I think it's been so important. Like, really think those questions through of like, and I think the biggest thing is knowing where we are in language. And I think we know the whys and where do we want to be, I think is the biggest, you know. And how do we ask the question? Where do we want to be in 10 years? What can we do now to help our future selves? Looking beyond the barrier and challenges. And, you know, what are the barrier and challenges? For, you know, what are the barrier and challenges? And I feel a lot of it's like creating safe places, you know, having the opportunity, working more of a collaboration within the organization. Funding, you know, funding's definitely changing government, you know, that's really impacts our funding. So, you know, you have to really collaborate with other departments and be like, okay, you know, this is what it takes to do this. And I think that strategy tells us that as well. You know, we're down to our last bit of fluent speakers. So we're in an urgency is to use them as much as we can for the work moving forward. So anything like you do any kind of work in our organization, my thing is like, you guys always need to include language. We need to record them, you know, then we have it. The team has it and can do this work.
Yes, very powerful words in terms of collecting and saving all of that data and that information. In context to how we actually did that in our strategy, with permission, which was almost every session, we had audio recorded where possible. So we would just have like a mic set up that would record the conversations. And then as myself and our note takers, we would transcribe our notes, write our notes, and then go back to the audio to see if there was anything that we might have missed or changed. And then ensure that, you know, there's that full reflection of what's being said. So any kind of notes that we took during any of the sessions, whether it was handwritten or typed, we had created this feedback loop. So we would share back all of those typed notes back to our participants to make sure, hey, you know what, is this reflected back? Is this what you're saying? And we want to make sure that you have room and you have space to say, hey, you know what, yes, I said this. No, I didn't say this. Let's change this. So there's a lot of kind of like continuous feedback and continuous having these little small conversations about, you know, what we're saying and what we're discussing in terms of language and culture revitalization. So from the entire project, both years, we had created a compiled Word document and all of the notes taken. Danielle, was like probably it was definitely over 100 pages.
I think it was like 300 pages.
It was like 300. It was a huge, it was a lot of data to sift through. And a lot of beautiful data to say, hey, you know what, we have a full-on report that this is what our community is saying about language and culture. So it's an incredible resource for us, you know, as planners and as implementers to look back to and to actually support and say, hey, you know what, this is what our community is saying. In terms of, oh, sorry, just one thing. In terms of all of the notes that were taken, we wanted to make sure that there was anonymity. So we made sure that there were no names included, or if there were acronyms, or if people said like anecdotal stories, that we would just like amend them just a little bit so that they still fall within the parameters of being shared publicly with our community.
I'm just going to add something in there. You know, I think that's a part of who we are in engagement. We're not just taking from the community of like what they're saying. So yeah, we are taking what you're saying, but we also were putting it, okay, this is what you guys said in this engagement, but it's also reciprocating that back. So they're part of the process. So it's like, yeah, no, that's what was said. Like, did we miss anything? Or, you know, it was an opportunity for them to add. Maybe they didn't get the chance to say that. I think that's so important of like, you know, some people just want to be heard. And I think, you know, we need to give them that. And it was I think it was, you know, I think our director at that time was like, I think it's important that, you know, that this is what's being said. And I think that was a really good suggestion is reciprocating, okay, this is what we heard from this engagement. And I don't think we had anyone say no, like, or anything. It was like, yeah, it was good. This is who we are, you know, engagement, getting that perspective, and the way we've done this strategy, and it guided by the 4 food chiefs, is making sure that we're having those perspectives.
Well put. Actually, and we can even think about that same principle of everyone has a voice and everyone's voice is important. And even as us, as the planners, as the core planning team, we had in our first year, we had a lot of learning points, a lot of points where we're like, Danielle, did that happen? Did we miss something?
Yes, a lot of learning.
Yes. In terms of learning, a lot of that was actually, I guess, as we progressed through the first year, more about project management, you know, how are we making sure that the strategy plan is going as we're wanting it to go? What are the community dynamics that we're coming up against? Because there was quite a bit of like, there's a lot of tension that was held in community in the first year. For us at the core planning team, that also meant like, what are the explicit roles and responsibilities that each team member has for this project? Are we shifting and overstepping some of those roles, or are we coming up with like little areas of tension, and how do we address that tension? How do we define what a strategy is for OKIB for language and culture? I think that was a really big piece for us as the planning team, like looking at, okay, well, you know, this is how these communities are doing strategies, but is that really reflective of what our community, OKIB, needs? And then, of course, I think always communication is always a huge thing. And, you know, I think we really tried to address that in the second year by setting up parameters, setting up spaces online, in person, for ourselves to have these discussions as a core planning team, but also like to look at some of the communication documents that are happening. And then, of course, the engagement series themselves. So there's a lot of intersectionality between, you know, what we're doing as in our planning roles versus what's actually happening. The major gaps that we came up ahead against in our first year, a lot of like tension and grief, heaviness that was happening in our community.
Yeah.
So in the first year, we had the uncovering of our 215 ancestors in Kamloops, and it was really, I remember it being like a really sad and heavy time in the first part of this project, which I think, you know, was also a very powerful movement in terms of, you know what, we're still here, we're still alive, and we're still fighting for our language, and we're still fighting for our culture, and this is a means to, you know, this project is a means to help support that. We were also navigating the COVID-19 restrictions, very interesting dynamics in terms of what was coming up and how we're able to adapt to them. So I think one of the really good things that we did for our engagement sessions with that was we would have like community drive-through. So we would have participants sign up, we would get them to fill out our survey. It would be like this little drive-through, and then we would, following, you know, like the COVID-19 restriction protocols, we would be chatting and being like, hey, you know what, can you just like fill out this survey if you haven't already done that, and then here's your meal, and we can kind of do this exchange. And then we were also trying to be very creative, like how can we still get input without, you know, actually sitting side by side in a circle or sitting close together? Like, what are some other methods we can do? And yeah, we were really creative with Post-its. I'm like, Post-its, I think, were our best friend throughout this entire project.
Yes.
So some of the other major gaps that we did come across were and still are climate change, displacement. So, you know, wildfires, community being displaced from that, flooding, droughts, like these are continuous things that our communities are dealing with. Navigating community timelines and overlapping obligations. There's a lot of projects that are constantly happening, you know, all the time outside of, you know, language and culture in our community. And it almost felt like it was like competing for community's time, competing for their participation, which was really hard. And we don't want to create more tension and more work for our people, right? We're trying to create less of it. We're trying to find the ways that we can overlap and create alignments. So it was really like a hard thing in a very, a good learning point for us, for sure. And then the other major gap/success is that in this project, we're not just looking at language, we're looking at language and culture. We recognize how they're both entwined intrinsically, how they're both go together hand in hand, and then we can't have one without the other. And we've actually heard this quite a bit reflected from our speakers and from our knowledge holders. You can't do one without the other. And so this project really reflects that, like how do we support language and culture together? Some of our major successes in the first year include us navigating our community strategy planning. So, you know, all of these learning points, all of these major gaps, all of the content that we've collected from the engagement series, we were able to do that even though there was, you know, a lot of struggle and a lot of tension. And then, of course, the creation of our committee feedback and dialogue. So creating an actual committee that, you know, supports and guides the work. That I think that was a really major success from first year that led for the rest of the project. So beautifully put. I think if it was just Danielle and I doing it, it would have been much more of a struggle in terms of, you know, this idea about including all of those voices, all of those insights, all of those perspectives beyond just the two of us. That saying, more heads than one really does work.
So true. You can't, like, you know, if you're stranded on an island, you think you're gonna survive by yourself, or are you gonna survive better with a team? Right? It's just like, you know, it's like as much as we want to do, and you know, I know there's some people out there who just want to do it and make sure it gets done the right way or whatever, but you know, I think it's important to have those perspectives and inclusion of the voices. So important. people want to be a part of the work.
Yes, yes, they do. In terms of our second year, some learning points for us included having a non-syilx editorial team who was constantly verifying the data that we were looking at. So as we sifted and collected and compiled all of the engagement notes, we also had like our editorial team who was also going through that and looking at it and like validating the work that we're doing, which was incredibly helpful, like really helpful. Yes, really helpful. I remember just thinking, oh my goodness, these two people are angels in disguise.
Right.
As
Well,
we were going through it.
And the important is we have like Scalwheel and I have our own biases of like, what's being said or, etc. So it's making sure, and I think Scalwheel did a good at just confirming of the work that she went through and the team went through of sifting those notes is to ensure, okay, was this the theme? Was this the theme? Like, because we can be biased within the work that we're delving into, right? So it was kind of good that, someone was saying, no, this is exactly what your community's saying. So it was nice to validate, maybe we weren't being biased.
Yes.
Because you can't be biased in this work.
Yes, we definitely can. We love language and culture. And I think that really much shows.
For sure.
In terms of the second year, another learning point for us was this the conversation about quantity versus quality. So whether or not, we had over 200 plus members of input versus, quality 15 to 20 focus group sessions, right? And it was this conversation that I think we will probably continuously have when it comes to language and culture. Definitely like a learning point for us to have those conversations on like, is this enough? Is this enough? What is enough? Right? What is enough? And so in our core planning team, in our committee team, we would just constantly talk about quantity versus quality. And that, I think that's just a thing that will naturally come up in language work. Some of the major gaps in our second year included shifting funding, short timeline turnaround, and then because our strategy was really just a strategy, we never included a strict action plan that accompanied it or a financial plan. So it's really just the strategy itself. It doesn't include, the secondary or tertiary documents that can help support and uplift even more some of the content that the strategy is saying. And then some of the major successes that we've had in our second year, this work has been done by OKIB community members. So everyone on the planning team is a community member. Everyone that participated in this project is a community member. Everyone who has, in some way contributed to this is connected to our community, which is a huge success, I think, in of itself, because we are syilx and we are doing our syilx work. Very beautiful.
I think, I'm just going to story share a little bit is like, I've worked in the organization for 20 years or whatever, off and on. And I've never really been part of a strategy plan of the work that we've done in the organization. But, I think it's the strategy of language work and involving the people, but also, we have people who have that capacity who can do that strategy work. So, like Scalwheel has done a remarkable job of doing this work and compiling everything. And it's amazing. I'm like, yes. And it's done in our scale choutet way. I think what speaks so even like it's a major success for our people, for our team, for the organization, for language work. I don't think it could have been done any better. Maybe a little tweaks in there, but I think like this is syilx really done very good.
And I think it's only done good because it's done with community in mind. So thinking back about, the 4 food chiefs, what will you do for the people to be? Same principle here. We're doing this work for our community, for our children, for our grandchildren, for our nieces and nephews. And I think that speaks of itself. If you guys ever get a chance to read it and look at it, it's beautiful. And then another, one of the last major reflections, successes for our second year is now we have this running compilation of data. We have language stats, we have engagement series stats, we have almost every kind of stat that you can think of in terms of our engagement series. We're starting to collect data that can help us as planners and implementers and action doers to support this work. And it's also really important because we want to capture, the language that we have here in community, capture how that looks.
Okay, reflections of second year continued, program continuity, living plan, what to do in the face of changes and challenges. So how has having a plan supported navigating capacity, funding challenges, and etc.? Ongoing team development strategy overview, organizational buy-in, and what is the process for monitoring, evaluating, and updating the plan? I think we're all in the same boat when it comes to navigating funding for language and culture. And I think, that needs to be, you really need to work hard in your community with other departments of looking at strategies. I mean, we're lucky that, we've looked for like Language Nest. There's a lot of early years dollars out there. So we've accessed those dollars to support our Language Nest. Because to run a Language Nest from from September to June is at least 500,000, and that's kind of bare minimum of like having your staff there, having your elders there, that you're feeding your children, you're feeding your elders, the staff are learning mentorship of all of that work. It's so important, like when we're doing language work, you're always trying to ensure that your staff are getting professional development. You don't want them to be just stuck here at one level. So it's always like just thinking outside of the box and how can outside of the box to ensure that can happen. Working with collaboration with the department. Well, this is what we need for our language and cultural program to happen. More working together for that work to happen. Encouraging other ones. Anytime you need things, like any time of our work, you guys should always be asking to translate everything, the work they're doing for events, for programs. And it's only going to help better of that language and cultural work. Ongoing team development strategy overview. Our team is always looking at that thing. It's like, okay, what can we do with the work that we're doing? Organizational buy-in is working with other directors within the organization, and then saying how important it is for language and culture. They should know we're an Indigenous organization, and it needs to be one of the main focuses throughout any of the work that we're doing. So what is the process of monitoring? I think, speaking of those project charters, those are important of the work that we're doing now. Of like, okay, so community wants more language resources within community. So the team currently right now is, okay, early years. This is what the early years team is going to do to create, develop more resources for community. Those will be going for those students and families, but also, like how can we share this to families so they can be posting these things all around in their house. So yeah, so those are the things that, we're working on with our strategy. Leadership at chief and council and the department level, always having the conversation. I just think, having that voice of understanding how language and cultural works, I think is so important, is having that voice there. So I think it's changing, things are shifting in the organization. Yes, this is a priority. It should be a priority in every department. Collective agreement and monitoring and evaluating LC team level through work plans. We make work plans every year. What's working, what's community wanting, what community has said is what we want to work on. And I think missing political and leadership level. So planning resources, individual team project work charters. I think I just touched on that. Spaces, increased language used in the organization, building and team. So I think our language instructors, a lot of them are, I talked about the early years of what the work they're doing. So like, how can this language instructors team get more language? Like, you know, what's within our office, you know, like a computer, a photocopy. There's words that have been modernized words for language that we can have and support people in the organization. Yeah, and also creating, like, you know, our language instructor has created Nsyilxcän in the workplace, a 5-week language class for people in the workplace to take a beginner language. You know, I think, well, if I was, you know, the head boss of like the organization, I would make it mandatory that staff have to participate in language class. Because the more that happens, it's the only more we're gonna be stronger in language and culture. You know, it's been taken away from us, you know, through residential schools, colonial. It's like, how can we rebuild that faster? That, you know, how are we gonna get to this goal or milestone for language revitalization? And we want to create more fluency within the community and the organization. So I think we really need to support that in our communities. I think it's so important. Like, everybody needs to participate. You have conversations. Why you know, like cheese. What did you do yesterday? You know, these things are, we need to be conversation in the language and, you know, telling these funny stories in the language. And you know, I can't wait till that day happens. We can be doing that more with in the organization, in community. So long-term resources, you know, continued language work with speakers and visibility and history. That was a big thing. We need to know our language and history and our culture. Living documents of community insights and data. Living literature review content for the LC team, and the, you know, the LRSPP committee process. So there's been some challenges and tangible solutions, you know. In our organization, there's always been a high turnover rates for organizational leadership. So departmental directors, you know, that's kind of been an ongoing issue in the organization, and little to no funding. I think, you know, First Peoples kind of informed us of the changes coming to language revitalization work and the changes of funding for all of us. And it's sad because, you know, I feel like First Peoples has done such a good job of creating this foundation of the work that happens in BC. And, you know, we've eventually, you know, the work since I've started here 8 years ago, it was very little. I was like, how can we even talk about fluency with just this little bit of funding? And it's like, eventually, you know, 2008, 2019, it increased and it increased and it increased. And we're like, yes, we're finally getting somewhere, we're finally hitting milestones. And I think what Sarah Scalwell shared in the beginning of our presentation, looking at the numbers of people who are participating in language, it's just like, it blows my mind. And now we've come to like, to almost to little to no funding, which is sad. It's sad for our people, it's sad for our community, but we're resilient and we can work. We have to work together as a whole for our community and our language and our culture. There was something else I was going to say for that, but yeah, it's we need to really figure out solutions, and that's one of my things of like working more as a collective. Continue to work with, you know, organizational departments, you know. I think we've done that. We can do that, enhance that more within our own organization. Fundraising for current and future language and cultural work. You know, we do a little bit of fundraisers throughout the year, but now I think we're really going to have to enhance that for the community, with the team. And yeah, those are just some examples of challenges and tangible solutions. But I think the overall goal or overall message I want to share, work with other departments, work with whomever to revitalize our language because we need to. We're at a time of urgency of working with our fluent speakers. Connecting our programs with our strategy. So this is our strategy. These are examples of, okay, creating opportunities for youth to be involved in planning and development of projects, programs within the community. So over this last year, we're like, oh, okay, this is what they're saying. So let's create the space, braided knowledge in our ways with our youth. We created a youth mentorship program, which has been an amazing program for our youth, and they've loved it, and they get paid for it. Like, what is best is mentoring youth in your community, and they're in language and culture with knowledge holders, elders, they get the opportunity in that space of just them. The 4 food chiefs night, continuing to have more chaptik nights. I think our team has done a remarkable job of doing that over the last like 5-6 years. I remember the first one they held, we had 30 people. The next year it was like 50, and then 75, and then we're up to 80. And then during COVID, we had I think up to 141 people participate. I mean, I feel that number is wrong because I feel like there was more. So COVID, it was hard times, but also good times. It also created these safe places for people to come in online. They could turn their camera off, on, participate, and I think it's done hard. COVID's been hard on us mentally, but it's also people had the opportunity to learn language at the end of the day. Family-oriented cultural camps in traditional territory. Our team has done that with our families, our language nest families, early year families, our youth mentorship, bringing them out on the land and getting to know our territory. Our elders saying we need to know our own territory and our language, and increase opportunities for families to participate in hunting camps and programs within the territory. There is a hunting camp, but we also take our families and everyone out to harvest Indian tea, or to harvest this time like Chakalusa, speetlum in the community. So this is just one example of how we're using the strategy to continue to guide our work within the organization. So yeah, this is one chief and an example. So yeah, I think we'd like to take this time to say thank you for listening for our journey. And I think when me and Scale will kind of talk about this, it's just like, holy, we could just take sections of this and just I think not everyone knows, or how it just this is how we did it and how we could lead support. I think we can just talk about a project charter, what's all involved in that, and who do we involve, and even mapping out the community, and even I think reviewing chaptik oral stories, how can you use your oral stories that guide our work. I think I recently done my master's program, and one of the people, research participants we interview is our stories have been there from the beginning. They've been here from all time, and they're still present, and they still guide the work that we do today. It's how do we utilize these oral stories into the work that we do today? And it's our way. This is how we do our work, and it makes sense to us, I guess, ensure that, we're doing the work right. And sometimes the answers are already in that story. I think it's so important. But I think, Scott, Will, you can say more too as well.
Yes, I think I could say that we definitely could talk more. We love sharing. We love talking about this work. It really is. It's been our baby for a while now. And we're so glad, and we're filled with gratitude and appreciation that you guys would are willing to listen to this story, listen to the work that we've done, and we're happy to share our presentation. We're happy to share any kind of insights, any kind of questions you guys might have. We're just really excited. Limt, cookst.
Cool.
Wait.
Limlimt, thank you so much, Danielle and Sarah. That was amazing. I learned so much from listening to your presentation today, and I'm just really in awe of all the work that you and your team has done on this strategy plan. I've had the opportunity to see it, of course, and it's amazing. It's massive, but it's amazing just the breadth that it covers, like how you've really thought about all of the areas of language revitalization in your community and beyond, and all the different spaces that it happens, and all the different people and organizations and groups who have a role to play in this work and kind of how they can contribute. And I just found it really striking, kind of the scope that you did in terms of inviting the community to co-create this plan with you, that it wasn't you didn't go the route of hiring sort of a consultant to come in and write the plan and hand it over, but you really invited everyone in the community to be part of this process alongside you, and to really develop this plan with you, sharing their input and insight. And I think that is really going to be so valuable for the strength of this plan, for the future of the plan, and kind of how it gets implemented. So I'm really excited to continue to walk alongside you and witness your work over the coming years, and just see how this goes. But I want to just thank you again so much right now for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us, and with all of the participants in our online learning series. This has just been really fantastic to learn from you, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of people who are interested in learning more. So thank you again for sharing your slides with us. So we'll have those posted on the website so that people can go and look at those as well. So I will leave it there for now. Thank you again, White Limlimt.